one thing that most people don't address when they talk about narcissism on the internet, for example, is abuse enabling, and specifically the psyche of the abuse enabler. I think that has to do a lot with human nature, in that you grew up with two parents really, and if one of them enables the other, you needing to attach yourself to a parent, one parent at least, you tend to, in a sense, idolize the abuse enabler simply because they're not as bad as the actually abusive parent, and because the abuse enabler often being the subject of abuse themselves, that person seems like a fellow victim, certainly, for one's early childhood, and this makes one identify with the abuse enabler in shared victimhood. To be honest, I'm myself at this stage, I'm 26 years old, I'm not sure if I ought to be labeling my mother as an abuse enabler per se. I know she's done a lot of things that qualify as abuse enabling. I know that she has stayed with my father far beyond what would have been reasonable if her motive for staying with him, her supposed motive, which was, which was to raise me and my brother, if that were her genuine motive. As in, I have offered to help her leave my father for the last several years, and she has just refused, even though, well, there are some things that would prevent her. For example, she is still schizophrenic, and on medication, and she wouldn't be able to afford medication for a long period of time stably if I brought her over. And at the same time, there is the concern that since she's still being seen by a doctor, he could just say, no, I don't want her to stay with her son. Although both of these things, they're not that relevant, because she does have family that can support her, and I know that with very little pressure I could, how should I say this, convince the doctor that supporting my father in his, I guess, desire to have my mother stay with him, because that's really what would motivate that particular doctor to require her to stay with him. That can also be overcome, but the issue is that, from what I've seen, my mother just got used to being abused and accepted, I guess, my father's abuse of me. And I would say that the reason she continues to want to stay with my father is fundamentally psychological. I keep hearing excuses from her, but I know they're excuses, because as soon as I present solid arguments to allay her concerns, she dismisses them. And I don't want to just talk about my mother here. I want to talk about abuse enabling in general. But as I said, I'm not entirely sure whether or not I should label my mother as such. Reasons being, first of all, the fact that she has been through a lot, and I do think to some extent she was brainwashed. But second of all, because to a certain degree I still love her. And this is incidentally why I've delayed making these videos for some months, for almost a year in fact, and well, other than the fact that I've had a lot of hardship in life, but just as there aren't a lot of videos and blogs and other things on the internet talking about abuse enabling specifically, I imagine because the people who know otherwise like to talk about them either felt sorry for the enabler or felt some sort of kinship and love. I likewise just didn't want to talk about it this way. In my case, my mother accepted certain things from my father, certain forms of abuse, I guess, that she was also okay with him applying towards me, and this is one aspect of abuse enabling that I'm going to bring up. And she was also sometimes eager to encourage him to apply these forms of abuse on me in order to discipline me in a sense. And sometimes was really absurd. So it was at once a matter of tolerating his abuse of me, just dismissing my pain and concerns. It was also a matter of goading him into abusing me so that she could control me in certain ways. I know that for a long period of time, in fact for my whole life, until very recently, and until after I made the most recent videos, I just couldn't have my own needs and feelings, or rather care about my own needs and feelings and take them seriously. And that, I would argue, is because my own mother had not taken my needs and feelings seriously. And that, I know that saying this I probably sound a bit like a spoiled child, but you know, when you're being beaten up by someone, abused by someone, and the person you look up to the most doesn't take that seriously, that's devastating. And the way she didn't take things seriously was by sweetly dismissing, I guess, and you want to sure how to describe this, by sweetly dismissing my feelings and needs, find them, you know, cute and childish, insignificant, but also adorable and worthy of giving affection for. And I think a lot of my mother's affection came in the midst of her dismissing my feelings and needs. So one way that I can describe abuse enabling in that sense is as soft abuse or passive abuse. I say soft abuse because hard abuse is all about coercion. It's all about imposing your will against the other person's will. Soft abuse is about manipulation. It's about making the person feel guilty for doing things that are perfectly reasonable and not, I guess, being outrageously supplicating towards the person who's instigating the guilt. It's amazing how much I let my mother get away with. When I think of the times when she asked me not to talk about my father's stances and opinions that were quite extreme, for example, knowing full well they were part of his abusive character, or maybe not knowing full well, but certainly being reasonably able to identify them as being part of his abusive character. It's amazing that I didn't feel well, I didn't feel angry at her, but I couldn't dismiss her myself. Well, I couldn't say that her dismissal of me was unjust, and that her willing blindness, I guess, to the abuse wasn't just. And I have to say this remarkably, even though all my life, for the most, for the last 5 years at least, I have often, if not indeed always, I cannot recall any instance in which I didn't intervene. I always intervened in some way or another for people who were being subjected to any sort of abuse or injustice when I found them in this sort of situation. I didn't ever consider doing so for myself, as in I would be willing to take a stance against people who are unjust towards me because they were unjust and because they acted against injustice, which is an absolute principle. And I care very deeply for moral principles in general. But when it came to me standing up for my own needs and feelings and developing my own sense of what was successful and unsuccessful, this sort of thing, as in when it came to me being more than a tool, more than a success object, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't register my own needs, feelings, motivations, ambitions, achievements, successes, and failures. I couldn't care about my own. I just had to always dismiss them, and in order to make room for other people's needs, feelings, etc., because that's how my mother taught me. She always wanted me to dismiss my own feelings, etc., in order to make room for hers. And this led me, because I was going on a tangent, I talked about how my mother tolerated my father's abuse, but at the same time I tolerated my mother's manipulation into dismissing some very essential parts of myself, some very personal parts of myself. And I felt it was okay for people to expect me to dismiss them, and for me to dismiss these things and treat them as trivial, as irrelevant, as not worth consideration, by reflex pretty much. As in, I had developed a reflex whereby if other people had certain desires, I would forget about mine completely and I would just pursue theirs, which made me, I guess, a very empathetic person, but a very moral person, because I could pursue morality and objective stances, ideal ones, but it also, in a sense, crippled me and exposed me to all sorts of people who felt it was okay for their own needs, feelings, etc. to be aggrandized at the expense of mine. I will cover all of this in greater detail in future videos, but the important issue I wanted to draw was that by accepting the abuse enabler, by overlooking her influence on me and perpetuating even this influence on me, I exposed myself to all sorts of people that were like her. And if I may add here, apologies for the stream of consciousness presentation. I do think it's important to show, I guess, how a person talks about this as much as what a person has to say about this. That's why I'm making videos or a blog. The issue that I want to raise is that not only was I tolerating this sort of thing, but I also thought that I could somehow persuade people who were like my mother, who didn't care about right or wrong and didn't care about other people's needs and feelings or not, but at the same time weren't abusive themselves. I thought I could convince such people that they would get into dire straits if they kept doing this sort of thing, if they had this sort of attitude. But and I also felt that I could inspire them to be moral, and that in a sense I could inspire my mother to be a good parent. But this is just like what my mother did towards my father, that she probably believed that even though he was abusive, that was somehow okay to tolerate, to accept, and that she could somehow find some way in order to persuade him to be better, but that's just impossible. And likewise, I found it's impossible to persuade the abuse enabler to no longer be abusive, to no longer be an abuse enabler, I guess. And to wrap this up, I have to say that people who are abuse enablers, they lock onto abusers. And if you yourself lock onto an abuse enabler and approach them and embrace them in all things and do whatever it is that they want you to do, just so that maybe, just maybe, they would actually see you as being more decent than the abuser, and this way you could actually educate them by example to become honorable and just people like yourself. That it certainly hasn't happened in my case, and I've made a lot of effort at it over the last several years at least. I think that sort of aspiration is as absurd as the aspiration to get the abuser to change, which, as we all know, doesn't happen. I think what I hope to show in the next several videos is that you can detach yourself from the abuse enabler's manipulation of you and from the abuse enabler's soft domination, if I can call it that, of you, without being a bad person, and that in fact you can be a better person by overcoming the abuse enabler's influence on you, and that afterwards you can accept the means which you can help the abuse enabler if you want to do so, without letting them, I guess, take away your individuality, your ability to care about yourself. I'll go into these things in greater detail in the next videos. Thanks for watching, and feel free to comment. I will be more than welcome.